Welcome to the second webinar in the Swiss Re Institute series on succeeding in today's China despite COVID-19. We're doing this in partnership with the Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce. Strengthening innovation is a staple of China's five-year plans. The Chinese government has invested massively in acquiring and commercializing technology and know-how through different means, ranging from technology transfer to homegrown R&D. How is the COVID-19 crisis affecting China's hopes of an innovation dividend to spur a new growth trajectory? We have invited two experts to tell us what they are hearing and seeing in the marketplace. Mark Greeven is Professor of Innovation at IMD, Switzerland's leading international business school, and has conducted long-term research in China on the role of innovation in the business ecosystem. Bin Sheng is a non-executive director at the State Development Investment Corporation, China's largest state-owned investment holding company. My name is Richard Francis, and I will be your moderator today. Before we start, let me outline the program. We will have two short presentations from our speakers, then a Q&A session. Please submit your questions in the chat box, and we will try to answer as many of them as time permits. Professor Mark Greeven is a former faculty at Zhejiang University and publishes on innovation in China, including his latest book, Pioneers, Hidden Champions, Change Makers, and Underdogs. A Chinese speaker, he is on the Financial Times list of the 30 next generation business thinkers. Mark, what's your latest thinking on Chinese innovation in the face of the COVID-19 crisis?
Thanks, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here. And in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to try to assess the Chinese innovation landscape and current status before, during, and after the crisis. Two important notes. Of course, this is not the first crisis that a lot of these companies have been into. Thinking about SARS, thinking about the financial crisis. And secondly, we have to realize that the crisis is still ongoing. So anything that we say here is work in progress. Now, I've prepared a couple of ideas, and I'm sharing my slides here. I hope everybody can see the slides here. We've been hearing a lot of, let's say, bad news from China. We've also heard a bit of, good news. And some of the, the good news, if we look at it, could refer to a kind of an eye for an opportunity that some of the Chinese companies are showcasing. And I just have a couple of nice quotes here that I wanted to share with you, that I thought were standing out, and as were said by executives from Chinese companies. So first one, this virus actually has been particularly helpful because, we've suddenly had requests, from over 30 banks and 20 insurers. Or any negative impact of this outbreak would be totally controllable. Oh, interesting quote. The situation turns out to be a win-win for the company and for the customers. Or the last one, we maintained a bi-weekly product launch during the crisis. The last one actually has an interesting story because this is a company called Peace Bird. It's a $1 billion retailer, fashion retailer that basically, at the end of Chinese New Year, they were kind of like, nobody goes to shopping. We have 4,600 shops and we have tens of thousands of salespeople. What to do? Of course, the answer was move everything online. And there was no time to build any plan or to ask any consultancy to help with that plan. So basically they said, we do it now, we do it tomorrow. So literally the day after, everybody had to start selling online. And obviously, lots of mistakes, lots of experiments. But the funny thing is, in February, which is the month where the virus grew exponentially in China, they had bigger sales than the same year before. So very interesting. But of course, lots of these kinds of stories that I could share with you, but I figured it would be better to do that slightly more systematically. So what I prepared, the next 3 slides are basically, who are the innovators in China before the crisis, what happened to them or what is happening to them today, and I have one short case to share with you that is probably of interest to have a bit of an insight, what are the first responses. So, I've spent 15 years building this picture. Now, you could say perhaps I'm a little bit slow. You could also say that perhaps it's a fairly complex landscape. So what I try to do here, and it's on the nice book behind me, I published a book last year with MIT Press on this topic. Who is innovating in China and how are they doing it? And I think we're all familiar, with the pioneers, as we call them. So these are like Michael Jackson here, Jack Ma, or Zhang Ruiming, or all these other people that are from the big companies like Alibaba, like Haier, like Huawei. And these are already there for a long time, and they have been seeing many challenges, lots of uncertainties in the last 20, 30 years. And these are really what we call pioneering innovators. The second group that we identified was actually what we call hidden champions. This is a slightly bigger group, probably around 200 of those. And these are companies that most people will not have heard of. They're hidden, so that's why they're called hidden champions. Think about Hikvision in smart security cameras, or the ladies company and the left below called Lens Technology, which actually has 50% of all our smartphone screen glass produced by her company. And others. And these hidden champions are important because they are extremely R&D intensive, risk averse, in many cases still family controlled, and they play really important roles in global value chains. So in other words, if we would take out these 200 companies, lots of global value chains fall apart, and we've seen that happening a bit recently. Now, the third group that we identified is the most exciting group. We call them technology underdogs, and these are a very large group of companies, ventures, sometimes around 8 to 10 years old, founded by, in many cases, overseas returnees with science degrees, engineering degrees, PhDs, people with real knowledge that came back and started business in China in a specific technology niche field. Both boys and girls, actually a lot of female entrepreneurs in that space as well. And it's a very large number. This is a conservative estimation of the total. Obviously small, very niche focus, usually business to business space. Interesting group. The last group, and this is a group that everybody's then familiar again with, are what we call the change makers. And these are, companies like Didi in taxi hailing, or ByteDance, the holding company of TikTok, which is now very popular outside of China, or Pinduoduo in social e-commerce. These companies are perhaps not so technology driven, so they're mostly driven by very interesting business models, and they're completely digital. Now, the other driver is venture capital, because a lot of these companies, they live on venture capital. Sometimes the joke is, they don't have a B2B or a B2C business model, but a B2VC business model. So this is the situation as it was, let's say, for many years over. We studied this for about 10 years, interviewed over 400 of these before the crisis. So the question was, I was like, so what happened? So what happened to these companies in since end of January until now? So what I propose to do is to look at those four again and give you my quick assessment of those. So if we look at the pioneers, it's interesting. In fact, what we see is that a lot of these incumbents, they're used to transform themselves and reinvent themselves for many years. So they tend to survive. They're not doing so bad, actually. When we look at some of the incumbents, they are organized like an ecosystem. We will talk about it later. They actually start to thrive. They actually start to do really well. So the pioneers group, interesting group. I will tell a bit more about it later. But first, assess the others. For the hidden champions, so these like deeply in the global value chains, they have a couple of interesting features. They are risk averse. They typically have very little leverage, so very little debt. Play key roles in global value chains. The only problem that they have is that their customer or supplier could go bankrupt, which would obviously directly impact them. So for the hidden champions, actually kind of a good story. They're very well positioned, perhaps slightly less positive as the pioneers. Now for the underdogs, and the underdogs, I remind you again, these are technology science driven. So you can think about AI driven companies or blockchain companies in the case of InsurTech, the more tech version of InsurTech. And these companies have a couple of good features, but also some challenges. So they're typically risk averse. They're founded by engineers. It's a swarm. There's lots of them, technology driven, and they have become quite attractive investment and acquisition targets, for instance, for the pioneers. The problem, of course, is that many of them are small and have very little cash. So if we look at the underdog group, individually, lots of ventures are struggling, lots of them. The swarm as such is surviving. And whether or not that's from 150,000 to 120,000 or other new companies coming in, this swarm is alive and kicking. Now, the last group is kind of a bit of a less positive story, I'd say. Change makers are digital-driven, very high-speed companies, but they're also companies that take very big risks, typically have not very solid revenue and profit models, and they spend a lot of money. What we will see here that some of them will be big winners. Think about ByteDance or think about Pinduoduo and e-commerce, but we will also see many losers, and that might not necessarily be a bad thing. It's a challenge to finding business models and revenue quicker rather than later. So this is kind of a picture that we got, and I thought it would make sense to then zoom in on one company for a closing story of the Pioneer Group, because I'm saying they're doing fairly well. So what does it mean? And I take the risk here to talk about an insurance company, realizing that our audience here is pretty much well aware of what's happening there. I'm going to talk about Ping An. So this is the usual suspect. But we had just had last week the earnings report from Q1, so I thought it would be interesting to give you my opinion on that, and also how they are going or not going through this crisis. So Ping An, basically, you are in insurance, and most of you are in insurance. So you understand that there's all kinds of challenges, market volatility, peak payouts, and all what you have. Big challenges. And insurance is taking a big hit worldwide, and depending a bit on the type of insurance, it's more or less. But for Ping An, it was basically, Q1, 42% drop in their profit. Of course, this is a disaster. So there's no way around it. We're not talking yet about, we need to bail them out or the whole industry is becoming insolvent, which is actually the discussion today in for instance, in the United States. But obviously bad news. However, Ping An is not just an insurance business. And when we dig a bit deeper, of course, we know that Ping An is doing, running some of the largest platforms in healthcare, in wealth management, all kinds of other interesting things. And if you look at some of the other numbers, in fact, the number of retail customers, consumers increased. Their banking business, so not the insurance part, banking business, actually increased the profit year on year. And if you look at the corporate premium income through cross-selling in their ecosystem of businesses actually grew. So a couple of good news. And then if we go a bit further, when we look at Ping An Good Doctor, so one of those businesses in Ping An's ecosystem is actually booming. This has always been loss-making. Always had trouble to find a nice revenue model and to scale up. But now they jump in users even overseas. For instance, with their joint venture with Grab in Indonesia. We see that Ping An Technology, one of those other arms, is actually starting to sell some of the solutions that they tried out themselves to other players, including competitors. And then most surprisingly in February, which was really a difficult month, they announced we're going to increase investment in non-financial technology. So in the middle of the crisis, they're saying, we need to invest more. And then the day after the earnings report came out, they actually announced and launched a new branch in their business, a new subsidiary called Ping An Consumer Finance. So when you look at this picture, of course, short term, huge challenges and big problems in their core business. But that's exactly that. It's only in the core part that we're seeing short term and maybe medium term big hits. But in fact, Ping An is an ecosystem. So all the other components of the Ping An ecosystem, some of them are losing, indeed, some of them are winning, some of them are actually gaining steam. So what I find interesting about looking at this company, especially being very hard hit in the core business, perhaps the medium and long-term prospects are not so bad for this company, and that is connected to how they organize themselves. So that's why I say ecosystems actually provide an opportunity to thrive rather than to suffer. Now, my couple of takeaways, and again, I mean, this is a discussion, so and the crisis is ongoing, but a couple of takeaways I would like to share with you here is, China remains a place of innovation. This is not the first crisis, won't be the last, and VUCA, or high uncertainty, is not strange for most Chinese companies, private companies I'm talking about here. Yes, we are in a capital winter and we will see, lots of sufferings, but we will also see a lot of new players emerging. Don't forget, some of the biggest companies in the world, Disney, Microsoft, GE, they were all founded during economic downturns. So my prediction is, with the entrepreneurial spirit in China, I think we will see a lot of new businesses, maybe some very big businesses emerge. Now, then I think we need to be prepared for even stronger incumbents. And be prepared for a full-scale, full-on digital business model war. As some of you probably have seen and observed, the Chinese companies have been fairly strong in adopting and embracing digital technology. This has only been enlarged in this current crisis. Now, then lastly, the landscape of ventures is going to be reshuffled, and this is obviously normal. Typically, most ventures fail anyhow. Now, a couple of more fail, but the swarm, as I like to call it, survives and is alive. Then maybe, as in terms of an opportunity, we will also see a lot of interesting ventures and interesting technology for sale in this period. So my last comment here is on a news that I saw yesterday on CNBC. It's a very interesting title. Power is up for grabs. We always love these fantastic titles. What is China's plan behind shaping this next generation tech? And what is interesting, I'd like to point out here, is very recently China announced that we have all these plans on Made in China 2025 and so on, but there's a new plan. It's called China Standards 2035. China building technology standards and defining technology standards for all kinds of important areas like artificial intelligence, blockchain, quantum computer, whatever you like. And I think that's very important. And I think we cannot underestimate this ambition. So why I close with this, I think that ambition has always been one of the big drivers for innovation in China, besides other conditions. And I think this also illustrates that the ambition is certainly still there and is there to stay. So with that, I'm done. So I have, I think, 10 seconds left of my 15 minutes, but I'm very happy to move that back to Richard and go on to Bin to discuss. If people want to read more, I publish on this topic a lot, so feel free to reach out whenever there's more questions. Looking forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. We're seeing there very much what's coming out of particularly the private sector. But now let's move on as well into the market, where we have Bin joining us from Beijing. In addition to his role as the director at SDIC, Bin is also a partner in the Swiss company Succeed AG. And this focuses on helping Swiss innovators get access to mainland Chinese markets. So Bin, what are you seeing up there in Beijing?
Well, I think, actually, I'm not in Beijing. Right now, I'm in Shanghai. I can tell you, everything just basically, back to normal. I saw yesterday, I saw a lot of people in the bar, in the dining, the very nice restaurant. It's just like 2 or 3 months ago. It's amazing. So I'm very happy, to be in a very energetic city right now. Now, it's my turn, to introduce, I give you, my presentation. First of all, I have to say, to my surprise, my colleague, Mark's, view, I really appreciate, actually, we have, basically, the same, conclusion about the Chinese innovation, after the crisis. So could you please bring the material on the screen? Thank you. Yeah, next slide. Thank you. So before I give you my thinking about the Chinese innovation, about the Chinese future, I want to syndicate with everybody about some facts. So first, I will start from the bad news. President Trump ordered U.S. companies to start looking for an alternative to China. They try to, I think they try to guide the American companies, to shift, some supply chain, out of China. So, which actually I thought it's very, very difficult. It's gonna take, years. And probably a month ago, I saw a Japanese government, they embarked about $2.4 billion to support Japanese company to decoupling their supply chain from China. And the first quarter, basically almost 500,000 Chinese companies forwarded. And I think over over half of them they are young companies, startup companies, according to the business data platform 天眼查. And also more than more than 50 million Chinese workers were threatened if the crisis goes on to September or November. That's a prediction from ADB. And they are China's export and the import and the tax collection declined severely in March, and because I think the government put a lot of efforts to block the infection, block the virus outbreak to other cities or other countries. And China's the GDP contracted 6.8%. Compared to a year ago, it's a first decline since 1992. So that's all the the bad news in China. So that's I think that's a facts I need to update with you. So next slide, please. With a lot of bad news, there are still a lot of good news. So the one of the I think the most important thing is it's called two sessions. Actually, it's called annual full session of Parliament and its advisory body to convene in late May, so next month. And the Premier Li Keqiang, will announce our New Year's, GDP target. I mean, the two sessions, were supposed to be held actually in March, but because of the virus outbreak, they deferred. But even right now, we don't know the exact, date, but hopefully, it can be held in May. That's very important. It's a critical moment, for the world, to see China's determination. And second is China has yet to show his card. The whole world, will be watching if there will be a multi-trillion-dollar stimulus package. Because you probably saw from the media, we have sort of lowered the interest. We have some monetary or physical policy to stimulate the economy, but for the official stimulus package will be hopefully will be announced during the two sessions. I think China already saw the world's the reaction from US or the reaction from Europe. So China now is deciding to give the whole economy our stimulus package. And third, China, I think the social stability is the top priority, because as I said in the last slide, a lot of people will be lost their jobs. That will increase the instability in China. So I think the government needs to not buoy the economy, but try to boost economy to avert rising joblessness. So that's also I think the companies doing business with China in the past decade, they really should know the social stability is a top priority for our government. And Mark just mentioned SARS. I would repeat in the 2003. After SARS, China's GDP grew 10%. So which means, in the past, decades, China really, they experienced a lot of, crisis, not only SARS, but, earthquake, a lot of things. So, so that's, that's a fact. I think, you can predict, in future, no matter, there is a crisis or not, the determination from our government to stimulate, economy is really, really strong. And regarding the supply chain, as I said, it's very difficult and also takes years, because not only the supply chain in China, but also the market in China. So that's why as much as I know, General Motors or Japanese auto car makers, they're unlikely to shift the production abroad. But I can understand for the foreign governments, they try to diversify their supplies, try to stabilize their production. That's really understandable. And for the the three pillars of China's economy: export, consumables, and the infrastructure project. I think China likely to invest heavily in the infrastructure, as they did before, because the export, I know a lot of the companies in China, they just closed their factory because their orders heavily rely on the export. So it's very, very difficult for the world to keep buying from China. So that's why they have to stop. And for the consumables, because people were threatened by their jobs, job losing. So I think everybody just very conservative to save cash as much as they can. So there is a will and there is a way. That's because, as I said, I always said, China, the government is very much, centralized. Once they decided to do something, and they're gonna put all the efforts, to do it and make it, success. Look at, during the Wuhan, crisis, the government just, built the hospital with 1,000 beds within 10 days. It's remarkable. It's remarkable. And yes, so that's why we, as a not only the local Chinese, but as an investor, we basically we like to watch the central TV, the CCTV, and we try to understand all the policies from the government, try to understand the government's determination to do things. That's very helpful for the investors to understand the economy. That's very important. Next slide, please. So gazing into the crystal ball. So I mentioned a lot of facts, bad news and good news, and we're gonna see. So what's going to be happening in China after crisis? For the innovation, is there any different? Yes, there would be different. I think for a lot of as I said, the companies rely on exporting. They're gonna be died in a short period of time. But for some technology companies in life science, artificial intelligence, smart manufacturing, they'll be good. They will attract more investment from a domestic market, from foreign investors. So the opportunity or threat for the new ventures, I fully agree with my colleague Mark. It's an opportunity, definitely, for sure. if as long as you are representing the new trend of a business, by the artificial intelligence or by some high tech things. Will there be still two-way connections and investment innovation opportunity between Europe and China? My thinking is it depends. It depends on my European friends, because I think for China if they want to keep their the speed of the GDP growth, you have to absorb more technology. I mean, that could be faster than you develop by yourself. So, but you see, when you look at US, or when you look at even the Western Europe, probably some politicians, they said, oh, you're gonna watch China, you probably be very careful to export your technology. So that's why I said depends. So while China still have funding to the innovation at the same stand, I think yes, probably more. As the reason I mentioned already. So is it going to be very tough for new opportunities? I think that is yes, because I think even in the past, before the crisis, I went to Switzerland quite often. It's very difficult, to find investment opportunity and bring the Swiss company to China. But I think after crisis, maybe it's even more difficult. While we see a new economic structure emerging in China after a pandemic, I think yes, we are going to see a lot of things. I already saw a lot of things changing very fast. For the the restaurant, in the past 2 months, it's all the restaurant closed. But you see, the catering service, the delivery service, the increase the tremendously. So you will see a lot of the economic new structure emerging. So when it be back to business as usual with even large market share for state-owned enterprises, because I used to represent SDIC. It's absolutely state-owned enterprise, but we are managing a $16 billion fund, but most of the capital will be invested in the private sectors. We are seldom invested to the state-owned enterprise, because we believe private sectors has some more energy for the innovation and the business development. And I think the last there need a protectionist risk and could impact economic openness and innovation in China, Europe. And it's unlikely, I think, China will be more open, to the world. And, as I said, China, for the private company, they like to absorb, more technology from the Western world, and that's faster, than they develop, by themselves. So that's my presentation. I'll be very happy to accept more questions to discuss. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bin. I'm also getting a bit of an echo here on the presentation, but let's move into the next panel. I've got some, and then we'll use the remainder for our audiences. We've got questions coming in. It was very interesting to see the difference between your two presentations, and you had a very grim picture, Bin, and then you started to coalesce, saying SDIC will be investing more in dynamic private companies and other areas like that. So they were coming together. So I'm going to throw that back to Mark in this sense. I mean, we hear from Bin the government's going to have a big role. I mean, how much of the money is going to be bankrolling innovation in these dynamic private companies, and what's that going to mean to them in this sense?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. So I think there's a couple of things that we need to realize. So generally speaking, a lot of private companies are not depending on external capital. So this is the first insight I think is very important. So there is this impression that every company that succeeds must have lots of inflow of venture capital or external capital. So I think this is one thing. Then the question whether or not money from let's say that originates from the state, if that ends up in the Chinese private sector, well, that's a question mark. So I think has been indicated. I think there is a lot of investment into the private sector, just because that's where most people work, where most opportunities are, and where economic growth is coming from. So it would make sense that a lot of that capital is going to flow to the private sector. Having said that, we do see, and especially the companies that I work with, that a lot of these companies' money and the source of external capital is still private, private equity, venture capital, private money, including money from overseas. So thinking about companies like Sequoia and so on, they also have a big stake, or Temasek in Singapore, in the private sector in China. So I think we need to distinguish between those really small ventures that are technology driven and that basically do not really need or use external capital, versus like some of the ones that are really dependent on it. Like we have some of the digital businesses that have no or a very limited profit model, if I put it politely. Then for them it might be important. I doubt, however, if the Chinese government is going to hand out money to some of those change makers. I doubt that. I think that's not so. In many ways, it's not so crucial to the economy, right? So if you want to invest money, you're going to invest in healthcare, finance, business, solid businesses that really need support.
Look, throwing it back to Bin, I mean, what was it? Something $16 billion to put into startups. I mean, how open is it for you taking Swiss companies to China to then receive money from those sources or other sources? I mean, is that even really feasible, given that we'll probably have more protectionism, not from the European side, but the openness in the Chinese side? Is it going to be there?
Yeah, they actually, for the $16 or $17 billion fund, most likely, we're going to invest in the domestic, companies. But as I said, in order to attract, some, technology, attract, some, high-tech company, it's actually the basic model is, the technology, for the market. I mean, they used to use it, That's why, we try to find, some, technology company and have, great potential in China's market. Then, we invest, and then we try to create, the collaboration, opportunity, especially with our portfolio companies, to create, sort of synergy to help, both, Swiss, small, medium-sized company with, our portfolio company to increase, their, the value. And also, I think I want to then mention, actually, it's been changing. 5 years ago, the Chinese government used to subsidize, the private companies, subsidize. But now, 5 years ago, they were, getting, smarter. They try to invest. So that's why, they need to, look for, some, professional or independent, the investment, firm, to help, government, to manage, the fund, to do something, for example, for some game changers, those kind of, very energetic companies, there are a lot of, capitals in the market, chase for those, game changers. But for the state fund, we probably, more focus, on the some sectors not that, fancy. For example, the manufacturing, it's a backbone of, the Chinese economy. For the life science, it's a long-term investment. It's not, just a 1 year you go to a NASDAQ. It's not that, the game. So we have, I think, because the structure of a capital market is so different. So we just, part of the, the market.
Okay, gotcha. Look, I'm throwing it back to you, Mark. On that topic, we're saying Europe is innovating. There might be some protectionist issues that come in here, but how would you do it? How would you do it yourself with your very deep knowledge of the market? taking innovations into China? How could you become part of these ecosystems that are developing?
Yeah, I mean, so this is an interesting question. So because I'm actually a failed entrepreneur, so I tried, and I started 3 companies that kind of, I still need to work at a business.
You can't do it, then you teach. Is that
right?
Yeah.
exactly. But I think there's always a couple of really important kind of pitfalls when I work with entrepreneurs from Europe that go to China. I'm a mentor of many of these actually. And some of the pitfalls is overestimating the competitive advantage, meaning that the idea that if it comes from Europe or other places, that it's probably going to be better than in China, which is in most cases, not all, in most cases not the case. So humility, I think, is really, really important. And secondly, is just understanding the customer. I mean, whatever you do and however high tech it is or however special it is or how many patents you have, it's all nice. But if you don't get what the Chinese customer wants, it's not going to help. And that's actually not so simple. And coming back to the digital business model, what I referred to earlier, Chinese customers and consumers, both business to business and business to consumer, are very used to communicate and work in the digital world. So if you as an entrepreneur want to connect to Chinese consumers or to Chinese customers, you have to get your act together. So both in terms of humility on what you offer, understanding the customer, and really being digital enough so that you are, let's say, mature enough to be able to even play the game. Now, having said that, I think there's a lot of good news because opportunities are still in China. If you take, for instance, even a difficult sector like the automotive sector, in the whole value chain of the automotive sector, how many different opportunities are there in the switch to EVs or in the switch to other types of connected cars, automated driving? Lots of opportunities, and I know for a fact a lot of European companies, a lot of hidden champions in Europe could play very, very important roles in that, and there's a huge opportunity in many ways. And of course, we're talking in the context of insurance. I think it's the only market that is still growing. So this crisis is putting a damper on the growth picture, but it is still an opportunity. So InsurTechs from Switzerland, if there's anywhere you want to be, it's going to be China, or China plus a bit of what is around China. So talking about Hong Kong and Singapore, Indonesia, and other countries that are very receptive to that. But I think there's certainly opportunity, but it's not like the gold is lying on the street, right? So there is really, it's hard work to get there.
Basically, hard work to get in there. And look, in your presentation, you brought up the China Standards 2035 issue. China as standards. Look, you can't walk past that without saying 5G, can you? I mean, we got 5G coming out. We've had the whole preceding tech war with Huawei and the issues going on there. I mean, I'm going to ask you straight up, Bin, what's the Chinese government really thinking there? Do they really think they'll be able to carve off a digital platform or a series of digital platforms which will be China standards throughout the world? Would you invest in that as SDIC?
Oh yes, as SDIC, we've seen a lot of high-tech companies, related, to 5G, technology, and we try to figure out, what's going to be the impact, for the industry, for the people's life, As I said before, in China, the government is quite, centralized. We have a lot of, civilians, camera. It's somebody said it's bad, but some said, it's very efficient. So there is always, the flip side, for one technology. Depends on, how do you, use it. I think, during this, crisis, as I said, once, government, they have a will, they have a way, to execute, to action it. So I think 5G. I mean, at least if next year we can use a 5G for sort of conference, the quality will be much better. So I think it's a great thing.
Okay, let me throw it back to Mark. But Mark, I'm going to ask you about a very specific state-sponsored innovation that's come out recently, the new cryptocurrency, the DCEP that's come out from the central bank. I know Bin would have a certain view on it, but you, I mean, with the standards, what's happening, how does that new cryptocurrency actually fit into the picture?
Yeah, so a couple of comments on this. So first of all, I've studied Chinese standardization of technology for many years, from telecommunications to lighting to whatever. So a lot of things. I published on this because I think it's fascinating and it's underappreciated because it's not a very sexy topic, right? I mean, technology standards are as boring as it gets, but they really change the game. Now, so China and Chinese companies have been part of international standardization bodies for ages, in sometimes even leading those international institutions. So I think it's actually sometimes a little bit hard to say like, oh, it's a China thing, because in a way it is also very much a global thing. When we talk about cryptocurrencies, I mean, there's a couple of different perspectives on there. So you have cryptocurrency and you have cryptology, right? So different types of, for instance, using blockchain technology for different purposes. So I think in the context of China, when it comes to blockchain-based solutions, this is kind of a surprise, right? So if you think about it, that the purpose of blockchain is to have decentralized, distributed ownership and decision making, which means by definition there's no central depository or central control. So in my mind, originally, I'm like, of course, China is not going to be part of that because it would want to have something that it could, fit into the framework. However, President Xi has announced, we are going full in on blockchain. We're going full in on cryptocurrencies and et cetera, based on that. So, and the logic behind this is why standardization, why to go to these technologies? It's because the Chinese government is very, very clever. We should never underestimate. They understand even it's not my favorite option, but I want to be part of the game. I want to be part of the dialogue, the conversation. And one very good way to do that is actually to start to build standards, to push standards in the market, either top down or by conglomerates of companies, so that you at least have a sort of way to keep track of and monitor what's happening with these new technologies. So I think that's I have sort of two perspectives on that. I think there's the positive side, which means it's great that there is now finally other countries powerful enough to come up with competing standards, which eventually might be better for the consumer and for the customers. The negative side, of course, is, well, how far will that go? We have to realize that China, parts of Asia have different values and principles than we have in Europe or in the US, and they are going to conflict at some stage. And how is that reflected in, for instance, the standards? So I believe in the positive side and in the collaboration, but I also see the downside that the moment that some of the Chinese standards become dominant, let's say in all the Belt and Road countries, so let's say the Middle East, Southeast Asia, then that is also going to be a challenge for companies and countries that have a very different perspective on data security or privacy or role of government in monitoring and everything. So I'm not saying any of the two is right or wrong. I'm just saying that there is a difference, and the standards are going to showcase that difference.
Okay, well, I've got questions coming in from the audience, so I think I have to move quickly and get some quick answers from you for these questions. Look, on to you, Bin. We just heard from Mark, Chinese government smart, doing a lot for innovation. What can Switzerland learn from China about how to accelerate innovation here in Switzerland?
Well, I mean, sometimes, it's very difficult because, as I said, the Chinese government is quite centralized. Once they make a decision, they just do it, quickly. But in that way, I think, for Swiss, it's quite difficult to learn. But I think we still have a lot of things in common. For example, in the life science, sectors, in the AI sectors, the manufacturing, sectors. I think best way to learn, from each other, is, we should, come to Switzerland or come to China, frequently and talk with, the counterparts, try to understand, how the market works, how to integrate, the advanced, technology, to our, the best, manufactured, product.
So what you're saying is Switzerland should be open to China, and this is an interesting thing. I'm not going to make a question out of this. It's just an observation. Bill Gates recently came out and lambasted the US government for not being open to collaboration for China, erecting walls to innovation. It's not a really good way to go. So that's probably what your point is there. Look, I'm afraid I can't let you expand on that until a bit later, Mark, but because I've got questions from the audience. Here's a question. What would be your advice for Swiss Re? How could Swiss Re, as an insurance company, a reinsurer, create an ecosystem? Is it time to buy new ventures, in China, or should we be partners to get into the market?
Yeah, fantastic question. So first of all, the answer lies in the first sentence of the question. Swiss Re, an reinsurance company. This we have to get rid of. So forget about that we're in the insurance industry or vertical, and I know it matters, and I know we have industry expertise and etc. And that's the core. Just like when you think about Ping An, it's the core of the business. But we have to stop thinking in terms of we're in the one vertical in one industry where we're operating. Eventually, what we do as an insurance company is we want to help people to feel more secure about their future, which insurance is a means to that end. So whatever Swiss Re can do to get closer to those customers, either business customers, corporate customers, or retail customers, is going to help. Now, how do you get closer? For instance, what ecosystems do, they're basically going to be touch points with all the customers in different parts of their life, or in the case of a business-to-business customer, in the life cycle of the business. So the more you get close to the customers by partnering with, investing in, or acquiring with adjacent businesses and adjacent solutions, the more likely you're going to achieve that. Now, one recent opportunity, and I'll promise to be short, is of course IoT. Internet of Things is providing fantastic opportunities here. It's like the glue potentially in an ecosystem where you can connect cars and machines and factories and people through wearables, and you can actually get all that data without even talking to them. So I think there's opportunities to do that, but have to think, we're not an insurance company. We are a company that helps customers and consumers to solve a particular problem, which means feel secure about the future. How can we help them do that?
Okay.
One comment.
I'll switch back quickly to Bin, because I've got a lot of questions that people are asking. A question that's come in for you, Bin, on your point number 5, which I'll repeat here. Is it going to be very tough for new opportunities that are pursued in the marketplace? What do you mean by that? What new opportunities are going to be tough? That was a question from our audience.
I think the Richard, you just mentioned about Bill Gates and the American officials. I think because America and China are basically, they are similar. They all have a big market, but Europe is different. Europe is different. So I really concerned concerned, after the crisis, there are going to be more noise in the business world, because there still have a lot of misunderstanding between Europeans and the Chinese. But I just concern probably after crisis the misunderstanding will be more. So that's why I feel like it's a challenge for me to keep doing business with European
openness for innovation. Okay, switching back quickly to Mark again, and then I'd like Bin to comment on this afterwards as well. Question from the audience: do you see some chance that money will be directed to support green innovation? And the question for you, Bin, to think about on this sort of thing from your SDIC, are you just seeing innovation in things like cement, chemicals, new ventures for consumer? Is there a green angle that can be built into the SDIC investment plan? You first, Mark.
Yeah, so I'm going to be really honest here. So I'm Dutch, so I'm going to be pretty direct. So if there's an opportunity commercially in green innovation, whatever that is, so I think it refers to sustainability or solutions for air pollution and water cleaning and treatment and so on. If that's an opportunity, I mean, an opportunity where money can be made, then the answer is yes. So then the assumption is that is this opportunity there today? Well, I think there is, because if anything, this crisis has shown that taking care of the environment is, I think, a precondition for a functioning economy. And I think Chinese entrepreneurs and Chinese capital providers understand that probably now even better than before the crisis. So I think the answer there is probably yes. Is it going to be the lion's share of investment? No,
Okay.
absolutely not.
Bin, your take on that. Where's the money going to go?
Well, as SDIC, we basically, focused, three sectors: life science, smart manufacturing, and electric cars. I think in the past 3 years, we invested in water treatment system, one in China and the other actually in Sweden. The one of the biggest the water treatment companies in Sweden. So we as an investor and as a responsible investor, we really pretty much focus on the green technology.
Okay, look, we've got a few minutes now to wrap things up. First to you, Mark. Your overall key take on innovation in China. What's your message for our audience today?
Yeah, so I think there's just three messages. The first message, innovation in China from China is there to stay. So this, I think, it's a messy picture, but the picture is in that sense fairly clear. So secondly, I think what can we do? What can we do with this? Obviously, keep seeing China and Chinese companies as partners in business. And coming to your quick question just now, yes, this is the moment to call your partners. And I know Swiss Re has a fantastic network of partners all over the world, including China. Call them. We're open for business. Explore new things, new areas, adjacent businesses. And yes, this is a moment to look for investment opportunities because there are companies looking for money, and these are good companies. So that's the second. Thirdly, it's all about, we have to collaborate. So depoliticize the business discussion as much as possible so that you can see this from a business point of view, ultimately serving a customer.
Thank you, Mark. Bin, your key message for our audience?
Yeah, I think, to my experience, in the past decade, the one strategy, is very, very successful. It's a long China. So I think, crisis, it's an opportunity. So try to catch the opportunity to long China.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's pretty much all we have time for today. Thank you very much, Bin, and also Mark, for your sharing your knowledge and also your views with us. Also, thanks to our audience for listening in and participating with questions, and our partner, the Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce. We will be sending you a follow-up email link to the Swiss Re Institute's website, where you can find a recording of today's webinar. You can also find information on the next webinar in our series on succeeding in today's China despite COVID-19. We'll be exploring the Chinese model of leadership and the role it has played during the crisis. It's a virtual pleasure to have had you with us today at the Swiss Re Institute. Enjoy the rest of the week, and 再见.